WCW Monday Nitro.
Yes.
First one was Nitro episode number 37, May 27th, 1996, in Macon, Georgia, followed by Nitro number 38, June 3rd, 96, in Asheville, North Carolina. So, for those of the people, for the people playing at home, I'm still
Yes.
why did you put these on our schedule? What is significant about these two episodes?
Did something happen on these that maybe changed professional wrestling forever to this day?
Brad
Uh,
Armstrong, he was there.
Steve Dahl, of course. No, I mean, of course, this is, in the first episode, Scott Hall makes his debut, and in the second one, Kevin Nash makes his debut, and kind of changes the game a little bit for
Yeah.
everybody.
Yep.
Forever. um,
Yeah, it is quite significant.
yeah. And not much else happened on these shows.
I think the only thing I was surprised at was I can't remember the last time I actually watched these, like so many of the shows that we cover. I completely did not remember that Scott Hall came down more towards the beginning of the show.
I had forgotten that as well. Like, I remember he came out, there was a match that no one cared about, and then he came out through the crowd and cut his promo, but I forgot that that happened earlier in the evening because he would come back at the end, and that's when he would talk about his big surprise and stuff. So I forgot about that as well.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, and uh, Nitro 37 is also the first time they're going to 2 hours.
yeah, so I thought that was interesting, and I was curious what your thoughts are, and I enjoy 83 Weeks, so I've heard Eric talk about his reasoning behind this, where he would do different commentary teams between the first hour and the second, and he'd try to make it a big deal, the changeover from hour one to hour two.
Yeah.
And I've heard Eric talk about why he did that. What did you think about the the announce team for hour one and then changing it up for the second half of the show?
It all makes sense, and I don't know if one necessarily inspired the other, but I know Monday Night Raw, and then you had Raw is War, when
Yeah,
they would go to 2 hours, and so I don't know which one did that first. And again, if they were whatever, um,
I believe, and I don't know this for sure. I believe Nitro was because I believe Raw at this point was still 1 hour, and so I think Nitro kind of led the charge, and then Vince had to kind of react to that and like, okay, now we'll go 2 hours, and then
yeah, and they were
we'll
still
put Pyro in between hour one and hour two, and we'll,
yeah, and they were still taped every other week. I don't remember which one it was, but they had the little graphic as Bischoff started to count
yes,
down, and
I believe
direct
that was the second show, the second that the countdown, and then they had the big Pyro display. And I've got to say, when I was watching it, I'm like, this does feel like a big deal. I am excited for it's the same show as 10 seconds ago, but for some reason it felt like, yeah, hour two. Like, I'm pumped about this.
yeah, no, it was definitely effective. Um, Setting off Pyro in the middle of a match and then switching over to a new announce team directly in the middle of a match, um, and seeing the guys in the ring look legitimately startled by the pyro going off in the middle of their match. Um, it was very interesting. I think, like all my snarkiness aside, I think it was a good idea to try to keep things fresh, even if it was like the placebo effect, where you're not
Yeah,
really getting something different. But um, I
right.
I thought
Yeah.
I thought it was effective. I think that Bischoff and Heenan are a great team. I think Bobby and anybody is a great team. Um,
Yeah.
Larry Zbyszko, I think, is a really good poor man's Jesse Ventura.
He was trying to kind of do that.
Yeah,
I believe it was the second show we ago. You know what it is like Jesse and Vince invented that role. Never killed her before, like I believe Vince came up with that idea. I've just talked about this. I believe I've got it right. Came up with as a heel announcer, and he kind of invented that and did it really, really. Mark, I get a kick out of him even when he says crazy shit. I just like Jesse. I get a kick out of the guy, but he was
yeah,
so good, and so many people tried to recreate that.
yep. And
Zabisco, I think, would be good as more of a straight man, because he does have a lot of experience in the ring, and I
yes,
like when there's someone who's a former wrestler who can bring insight. Like I think Booker T was always really good at that. Um, I don't know why he was the first guy that came to mind, but Booker was always good at that. JBL, I thought, was good at that when he was on commentary.
yeah,
Just playing the straight former wrestler who's offering insight because he's been in the ring himself. That would be good. But I think Shivani guy too. So, you know, I don't know if Zabisco wanted to be or told to be or whatever, but
you've been frozen for almost a minute and a half, and it's just been skipping.
oh, okay.
I like your picture just unfroze now. Sorry. Like I've been able to kind of make out what you've been saying, and I was just hoping for it to kind of fix
Oh,
itself,
okay.
but it's starting to cut out for like 5, 6 seconds at a time. So you can just wait for a moment.
Okay.
But well, and because what you were saying is absolutely true. Eh, well, and I don't know much about Gordon Soley. I know if Tony is listening to this, as usual, he's probably having a coronary. Um, I, that joke never gets old, but um, I know that Gordon Soley, um, somebody who Jim Ross credits as being the greatest wrestling announcer of all time,
Yeah.
was like a solo act, and for the most part, at least, and Vince and Jesse had just great chemistry.
Oh, yeah.
And Jesse, like you said, having the ring experience wasn't just like a snarky know it all. He was a very legitimate source of information and legitimacy to what was being said on commentary.
Yeah.
And
But then he
so,
also had the charisma and the personality to be the very believable heel. And I think the fact that he was not a legitimate fan of Hogan and he was doing this during the Hogan era.
yeah. And Vince has charisma in buckets. I mean, he's
Yeah.
and again, granted, we grew up in the time where you weren't supposed to know that he owned the company,
Right.
and they were very effective, and he was individually too at keeping that kind of under wraps. And so, I didn't know that. I guess Tony Schiavone was on like the booking committee. Like I want to say he was akin to like an executive VP for the time.
Okay.
I'm not entirely sure what it was, but he did have a lot of standing in the organization. Like he wasn't just a mouthpiece, like I don't know, Corey Graves or something. There's not a slight against Corey. I like Corey, but
I like Corey too.
yeah, but so
I didn't know that.
yeah, he does have some standing aside from just being a mouthpiece, and he did back around this time as well. Um, So Zabisco always he played the role of like that, kids get off my lawn. I thought he really did do that well. Like
Yeah.
I know calling him a poor man's Jesse is not very flattering, even if it is accurate, but he was far from terrible.
Yeah, it's just there's a couple he says a couple things that are a bit cringeworthy here. Uh
Very heavy-handed heel commentary.
yeah.
Um,
But I thought they made a pretty good team, these two.
yes.
And so yeah, like I made a note as well that they said this is their first time going to 2 hours. I'm sure that is not a coincidence.
Nope. I bet that was very strategically planned.
And maybe that might explain a lot of things that we might be talking about today. That this is the first time going 2 hours, and maybe it will take a little time to figure things out.
Yep.
I hope
Um,
that's well, I think it is the case, and I think they did figure it out, but there were some
well,
growing pains, I
no,
think.
there definitely was. The biggest question I had when reviewing these two was how much of the episode was planned around Scott Hall coming in on the first night, and then Kevin Nash. Granted, in episode 38 and June 3rd, he doesn't show up until the very end of the broadcast. But
Yeah.
again, also being surprised that Scott Hall shows up towards the beginning of the show. What a great way. Hey, stick around. We're going to hear from this guy.
Yeah.
I mean, just straight marketing right there, but very effective.
Yeah, they were very good at planting a seed like here's a taste of something awesome. Stay tuned because you're going to see the payoff later.
Yep.
Um,
And I can't remember, but I think it was episode 37, the first one that starts the 83-week reign um, of WCW over WWF in the Monday Night Wars. It's one of these two.
it could be. I'm not sure. And it's funny that 83-week thing is interesting because it's like that was just in a row. It's not like WCW came out of nowhere in the weeks prior to those 83 weeks. Like they were winning some, they were losing some for a while prior to those 83 weeks, and it was the same after the 83 weeks. So
Yeah.
that's not that I've heard Bischoff say total how many weeks they won, and it was way higher than 83. Um, but it was just those are in a row. So like I think people kind of look at it in hindsight as like, oh, they had 83 good weeks. It's like, no, they had a lot more than that. It's just those happened to be in a row, but they won a lot before and after.
Yeah.
And were neck and neck for a long time before and after. But
Yep.
I
But
think
yeah,
that's something that we kind of overlook.
yeah. It wasn't just a couple years that you know they had an advantage, and it Bischoff, WCW, and this angle here. I think this is the driving force that pushed wrestling into its next era.
And that's the thing. Like this one angle not only changed everything for WCW, but it changed the entire business.
Yeah. Yep. This is extremely significant because I don't think like the WWF would have gone out of business, but it was very stale. It was a very stale product overall,
And this
and
forced them to change.
yeah,
I don't think Vince would have changed without WCW turning into the juggernaut it became and
I mean,
forcing Vince to just reassess how he needs to present his product.
yeah, I don't know if you would have been able to get Stone Cold and The Rock out of the tail end of the new generation. I don't know if you get those.
Yeah, and it's
Maybe.
funny to think, and not that Vince, I mean, who would have looked at Steve and been like, okay, you're Stone Cold, you know, but like the way they were originally presented was The Rock had a Jerry curl and streamers and, you know, was kissing babies as the happy-go-lucky third-generation wrestler, and Steve Austin was the master of the ring. And his head looked like a tennis ball, and he wore green tights, and
And he
you
wore
know,
white boots. I mean, that's not really
yeah,
cringy, but like his look is just cemented in my mind as Stone Cold. And so seeing him in white boots without a goatee and just like a little bit of hair is just
yeah,
such a stark contrast to his even more simplified look as Stone Cold.
yeah.
Um,
So this juggernaut, this show that altered the course of pro wrestling forever, we're kicking it off with the American males.
yep.
And they will be going up against Ric Flair and Arn Anderson, who come to the ring with Woman and Liz because they needed an entourage of females at this time. Um, as much as the American males are kind of a punchline, like you kind of chuckle at them, I understand why they went with those guys.
Yeah.
I mean, they're two super good looking dudes with great physiques. But I think the American males, like we've talked about with the Smoking Guns, they would have been a great late 80s, early 90s tag team. But in 96, maybe they were a bit late coming to the party.
Yeah.
And here, and it's obvious in this match how green Bagwell and Riggs are. Super green, which is, I mean, put them in there with Flair and Arn because those, there's no two better guys to get something out of some green guys. But
Yeah.
so as much as like people make fun of the American males, it's almost like we talked about with Ahmed Johnson. Like they check so many of the boxes, you got to go with the guys and give it a try.
Yeah.
And both
And
guys did improve from what we saw here on this show. They both did get better.
yeah. And sometimes the cringy gimmicks weren't always their own idea. I mean, back around this time, usually you were given this to work with, and you had to make it work or not. And I don't think, even at this time, that Bagwell and Riggs were terrible at all. Um, they did seem, like you had said, very green. Um, this I this was overshadowed so much by like the Horseman entrance and
Right.
like the catering table that they had notched out part of the crowd and like the gate to have like a sommelier or a waiter or something there with
Yeah.
champagne and hors d'oeuvres.
I did get a kick out of that.
Yeah,
And
it
they
was.
they sent champagne over to Shivani and Zabisco. I got a kick out of that. They're sitting there sipping champagne.
Yeah, out of these very nice glassware glasses.
Yeah, yeah, I
Um,
did get a kick out of that. That was fun.
yeah, and so I was more, I guess, focused on that than I was, taking apart the match. Um, I thought this was a great match. The only thing that between this one and the next episode, Elizabeth seemed very uncomfortable in the role
She
she was
always
in.
seemed uncomfortable in WCW.
Yeah,
And I think it's because of the presentation. Like, because I loved the way she was presented in WWF. And, you know, we've covered some of those shows and talked about how significant she was and how huge a part of the show she was and how important she was to Randy getting over.
yeah,
And she was presented as this, like, just this demure, elegant lady. And here she's coming out like in leather and she's with Flair, who's the nature boy. And that was a really good role for woman.
yeah,
But I didn't think it fit with Liz. And she did seem uncomfortable every time she was out there. And like when Flair would cut promos and try to play off the two of them, it like when he would ask woman a question, she'd go with it and she'd be all in, and Liz would be like, "Yep, that's right, Nature Boy." Like, like she seemed out of place in this role for sure.
Yeah. Woman who we've seen in ECW with the Sandman
Yeah,
took to a role like this
yeah.
great.
I
She
mean, she
was
was like Sherry. She was so versatile. She could put her with anyone. She knew who she was, what she brought to the table, and she knew how to make the most out of everything. And Liz, I think, was good at being the WWF version of Liz. It's weird to see her in like leather skirts and leather pants and trying to be kind of sexy and edgy. Like it was never a good fit for me.
no. And I mean that isn't necessarily a commentary on her skill or anything like that. She's the first lady of wrestling. She
Yes,
and she does that maybe better than anyone. She um, is not a skank from the bar.
absolutely not. And that's the thing is like there's only been one Liz, and I think she was so good at what she did that they never even tried to duplicate. Like there's never anyone who tried to recreate that role.
Yeah,
No one even tried because no one could do it like Liz.
yeah.
But having her here in her association with Rick, it just didn't fit for me. Um,
And even
yeah,
just seeing Rick kind of in his moment, like in 1996, wheeling, dealing, kiss stealing, like he essentially is playing like a bleach blonde tanned Bruce Wayne. um,
yeah,
and
and he's great. Ric Flair is great at being Ric Flair,
yes, he
but
is.
it didn't need Liz,
It did not.
and it
Um,
didn't fit. It with woman, yes, perfect fit,
yeah,
but
yeah.
Liz
This,
didn't need to be there.
yeah. So that stuck out right away. Like it again, Ric Flair is great at being Ric Flair.
Yeah,
Arn Anderson, the Enforcer and Woman. You know, this is WCW's bread and butter right
yeah,
there. And so seeing how uncomfortable Liz was did kind of jump out at me.
yeah, and I know we've talked about that before, and I'm sure we'll talk about it again because it's just, it'd be like F- Liz is great at Liz is the best at doing one thing. If you try to get her to do something else, it's sort of like if Rey Mysterio was a dastardly heel. It wouldn't work because Rey isn't good at that. Like Rey is great at being the underdog superhero. If he was a heel, it would not work. So let him be the thing he's good at. And I think
Yeah.
with Liz, it's the same. Like she's good at one thing.
Yeah. And I know later on and there was real life stuff with Luger, Savage, um,
Yeah.
and Liz. She would be put in some different roles. But yeah, Woman, especially after seeing her with Sandman and ECW a couple times, slid right into this role like a
Yeah.
glove. And yeah, the other thing that really stuck out again, this was Flair in Flair country, and I don't know, like when we talk about like the Rock and Roll Express match on the next show, I can kind of go further into my yeah. um, But yeah, this was a great opening match. Flair is in his element. It was very entertaining.
Yeah, it was entertaining. I mean, I know we talked last night about like, I don't think either one of us really, especially since it's a TV show, not a pay-per-view, neither one of us really went into great detail and notes about the matches themselves.
Yep.
The few things I had was it's weird that the crowd was behind the American males. I thought that was interesting. Not surprisingly, Flair and Arn just put on a tag team heel psychology masterclass
Yeah.
because that's what they do. Bagwell and Riggs were very green. I made a note about the Ric Flair shoving match with the ref and how much Flair sold that. Uh,
Yep. In the ring, in the aisleway. I mean, Randy Anderson he could have finger poked a Doom Flair and he would have flipped all over.
yeah, the way he sold those shoves, it's like, oh, were you in there with the giant? Like, no, you're in there with the ref, but that's Flair's gonna sell, man.
Yeah.
I did like the kind of small package spot where they were going back and forth, like different teammates were rolling this, you know, pushing
Yep.
the small package over to get the pin. I thought that was kind of fun.
Yep.
Arn hits a DDT, which leads to Flair pinning Bagwell. Um, and then Gene interviews the Horsemen about their upcoming match with Mongo McMichael, Kevin Green, which is all over the show.
Yeah.
I loved Arn's line that he said he never met a football player he couldn't step over to get to a better fight. That
Yeah.
was a fucking awesome line.
Yeah.
And man, was this show very anti-NFL.
Yeah, it sure
Between
was.
Zabisco's shots he was making on commentary and then the stuff Arn was saying, you know, the vibe I got from this is that NFL players are pussies, apparently,
Yep.
which
And
is good heel psychology.
it is. And I mean, especially by 96, we are way past the top of the hill for Arn Anderson. But it's really cool to see him still, I mean, just hit home runs like this in the enforcer
That was a
role.
good line. That was a really good
Yeah.
line.
Because, he's got kind of a raspy, low
Yeah,
tone kind of voice. And so, um, for where Ric Flair is just like a sparkler being held by a 3-year-old waving it around. And so it was cool kind of hearing and seeing Arn in the enforcer for the Horseman role like that. It kind of like I listen to his podcast not every week, um, but I have picked out ones that I thought would be like an interesting topic for him and Conrad, and I listened to those. And so again, Anderson was able to do so much with so little.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think he's one of the kind of underrated stars of his era, and I think he's respected to the people that saw him
Yeah,
and people that didn't. It's sort of like maybe kind of forget how great he was, and he was a great promo. It
yeah.
was just he was always next to Flair, so he didn't get the credit for being a great promo. Um, but yeah, it was a cool promo, and that's exactly what you want to say as a heel. That line about the football players, that was a great line. And then Flair just had the Nature Boy gimmick turned up to 11 here. And then Deborah's involved. He talks about how Deborah belongs to him. So it's Flair and Arn being Flair and Arn in all their glory.
Yep. And with Mongo and Kevin Green Green's with the Jacksonville Jaguars, and they're in Macon, Georgia. So
Okay.
Southern sports have, eh, you know, eh, like I don't know if this would be like Atlanta Falcons um, territory, but if you want to,
You're talking to the wrong guy
you know,
to give you any insight onto football.
um, but yeah, if you want to poop on another NFL team, like nowadays, I would, if they're coming out, wearing the jersey of a team like later on, um,
Yeah.
was it the next? It was this one where they had, or they no, it was the next one where they came out with the jerseys on, wasn't it?
I don't remember.
Yeah. Well, because they're in North Carolina the following week, and Jacksonville's from one of the Carolinas. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, and so just seeing wrestlers taking shots at um, other sports, other athletes, and wearing out, um, jerseys. You would really kind of see this through like the attitude and like ruthless aggression. It's real easy to get cheap heel heat. Um, like when Jarrett it was his reign of terror, one of his reigns of terror in TNA, and I can't even remember which sport it was, but in the front row they had guys like I want to say that they like had just lost the Super Bowl,
Yeah.
and they Jarrett put them in the front row and is like, "Hey, do you want to do this?" And like they were really drunk, and so Jarrett went out there and started his line, and like four of them hopped over and started to like just go way out. And for all of Jarrett's um, abilities, um, a ballroom brawler is definitely not one of them. And
Yeah.
so, like, whoever was like in the ring or whatever had to like come over. It was like giving serious shots to get the guys off of Jarrett. And
Wow.
so, I mean, points for really dialing that up. But
And Zabisco leaned into that hard on commentary, just taking shots at football players and uh,
well, that's the
really
thing.
hard all night.
Yeah, but he's like a legitimate tough guy and like this grizzled veteran of the ring. So, um, it's one thing to have, uh, uh, maybe like announcers or things like that kind of do it. But then when you have like again the grizzled type veterans like that taking shots, he just kind of smirk and it's like because wrestling caught a lot of shit back around this time.
Oh yeah.
To really any other sport. And so I can appreciate again people like Larry or whatever just you know getting in there to keep taking those shots at him.
And then we get a video clip to see who the Horsemen are going up against. Video package of Steve McMichael and Kevin Green working out
Yeah.
with a lot of lame trash talking over it.
Yeah.
It didn't make them seem that formidable. I
No.
know they are, but this video didn't do them any favors, making them seem like the badasses that they actually are. And I know Flair must have loved this because I know how much respect he has for Mongo as a human being, and I know
Yeah.
he's a big sports guy. So like Flair must have loved every bit of this working with these two guys. Um,
And they were great sports about it too.
yeah, that's the thing. Like some people come in with a chip on their shoulder, and these guys kind of played ball, you
Yeah.
know?
And the last time we saw Mongo was in the main event of WrestleMania 11.
Yeah. And then he's not at the announce desk anymore with his dog. He's training and doing some lame trash talk in the gym.
Yep. Saying his prayers, eating it. Nope, not him. Not him.
Yeah, so up next we have Steve Dahl versus the Mauler, accompanied by Colonel Rob Parker.
Yeah. The Mauler being Bobby Eaton, I believe.
Yeah, and he's one of those guys. I haven't seen a lot of him, but he's one of those guys that like whenever I listen to any wrestling podcast, there's just universal respect of this guy was amazing and never made it big. Like like
Yeah.
he
Oh,
never made it to the top. Like, but he was like universally respected as a worker.
yeah. It's Mike Enos. I was mistaken. Not Bobby Eaton. It was Mike
Oh,
Enos.
okay. Yeah. uh I gotta say, Mahler looked good here.
Yeah.
Like the match itself, I was like, if these were people that the audience cared about, the match itself prior to it being interrupted was actually good. The offense was good. He does like really nice overhead belly to belly and a second rope fall away slam. Like
Yeah.
this was a pretty decent match.
Yeah. And he's a pretty big dude too.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it seemed very legitimate. The gimmick, I don't know. I'd never even known. Like I remember there was Mean Mike Enos. Um, so I'm just not familiar either with what
Yeah,
was
it's kind
going
of
on.
just like a name you hear. It's a dude that's been around, but like, but I was kind of prior to Hall coming out, I was watching this match. I was like, this is a pretty good match, actually.
Yeah.
For a match that's kind of just a cold match, the action was quite good. And then so they cut to a commercial, and as soon as they come back from a commercial, you can see Scott Hall walking down the arena stairs opposite the hard camera. And I loved looking at the fans as they realized who was walking past them. I was looking at the crowd just sort of like, hey, hey, hey. Because you just see a sea of people all of a sudden turn like, holy shit.
Yep, and he did just kind of come out of nowhere. This was just a stroke of brilliance.
And I've heard Scott Hall talk about this. It's just Larry Zbyszko. I guess the initial plan was for Hall to walk down the ramp in the aisle like anyone else did, and I guess it was Zbyszko that said, "Come out through the crowd." I know Scott. I know him and Zbyszko were tight um, from back in the day and stuff, and I know Hall has always given Zbyszko credit for coming up with the "come out through the crowd," make it seem more legit that way, and I can't imagine it being any other way.
Yeah.
So kudos to Zbyszko for that.
Yep. And here we had Zabisco and Tony Schiavone still on commentary. And so I was paying pretty close attention. Schiavone, I thought, did a really great job of being bewildered.
Yeah, yeah, he behaved exactly. He like if you didn't know, you'd think, oh, he really didn't know about this because he did that good of a job, the way he sold it, acting confused and stuff. Um, and I just love kind of the arrogance of Scott Hall, and it also sells how important he is that he can just come through the crowd, hop the guardrail, grab a mic, hop in the ring, and the match stops. The guys
Yeah.
don't try to attack him. They don't, like that. It's like how important is Scott Hall that, you know,
Yeah. Everyone is just stunned still.
if someone tried doing that during an APA match in the WWF, I don't think they'd get that far. But
Yep.
so yeah,
And
he hops in the ring, starts cutting this iconic promo.
yep, you people, you know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here.
Yep.
Where is billionaire Ted? And now he starts running down all these uh, low key references to the billionaire Ted sketches that Vince and WWF were doing. Billionaire Ted, Nacho Man,
Scheme
and
Gene.
yep. And back to what you had just alluded to. Where's the Nacho Man? That punk can't even get in the building. Me, I go wherever I want, whenever I want.
Yeah. And the thing about this, and I know it's by design, the fact that he's making those references, like everything about this leads to Vince sent this guy, which is again by design, but like the way he phrased everything, the stuff he was saying, and the way he was saying it, it leads you to believe like, Vince sent this guy, which is part of the magic. That's why it worked.
Yep. And McDivitt would agree.
Yeah, yes, he would. Uh, and then Scott Hall says he's got a challenge for that Ken doll,
Yeah.
uh, the Weatherman wannabe, uh, which I like that he was taking shots at Eric
Yeah.
because he does kind of look like a Weatherman or like a Ken doll, and he does the whole, you want a war, you got one. Um,
Yeah.
and
When that
one,
weatherman wannabe comes out later tonight, I got a challenge for him.
yeah, so again, like so brilliant. It's like, oh, gives you something to look forward to because Bischoff's coming out an hour two. They've already said that. And Scott Hall's got a challenge for him. What is it going to be? Keep watching.
Yeah.
And one thing that I noticed too is I paid attention to the audience as this was going on, and they were silent.
Yeah.
And it was silent because I think they literally they had no idea what the hell they were witnessing. Like I don't think they were silent. They weren't silent because they were bored. I think they were just like, "What is happening right now?" And I can't imagine being in that audience, thinking you're just watching a Nitro, and then Scott Hall fucking comes out and hops in the ring.
Yeah. Yeah. That I know that um, this was Bischoff has said that he got a lot of inspiration from this from Japan. I,
Yeah.
which it was the UWF, right? Do you remember which promotions had kind of started this?
I don't know a whole lot about what was going on in Japan in this era. Um, so I'm not sure. I know that something like this was done in Japan, like kind of an invasion type angle. But I don't know a whole lot about it, to be honest. I wasn't really following what was happening in Japan at this time. But the thing with this too is like, I know Bischoff had the idea, but you need the right guys to do it.
Yeah,
Hall and Nash were absolutely, and then later Hogan were absolutely the right guys. Um, because this, as great of an idea as this was, if you do it with the wrong people, it does not work. It falls flat on its face.
that was something I wanted to ask you about because we had talked about this some time ago. If if the NWO would have worked with anyone else, if the the gimmick or just the idea of it would have would have been good enough on its own to work with anyone. Um, and I've kind of thought that like if like Brett or Sean and you had said that like even with people like them showing up, like Scott and Kevin are the ones that took this and got it over the way it was, and so um, I wanted to kind of pick your brain about that. If if there was any other people at this time who could have crossed over and got this to work the same way Scott and Kevin did?
I don't think so, and I'll tell you why. Because I think like because it's not necessarily about the magnitude of stars. Because let's say Brett and Taker jump ship instead of Hall and Nash. I don't think it works, even though I think those guys are bigger stars, were bigger WWF stars at that time. I don't think it would have worked. I think the reason that it worked with Scott and Kevin is I think because I've given a lot of credit to the Click for having that attitude before attitude happened. So I think those are two guys that got this on a level that maybe Brett, who's more old school, even though he was a bigger star, I don't think Brett would have embraced it or portrayed it the way Scott and Kevin did. Do you know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah,
And one thing I think is interesting, and I've heard Bischoff, and he doesn't budge on this, and I actually don't agree with him. What he was trying to portray wasn't that these guys were invading. What he claims to be was trying to portray was these were guys that were former WCW guys. They were misused and mistreated. Then they left and made it. Now they're coming back to punish WCW now that they're stars. And I never got that as the focal point. Maybe as a subplot a little bit, yeah, but not as the main focal point that is their motivation is to punish WCW for not using them right the first time. But I know that was a big thing to Bischoff. I've heard him talk about.
you think he's on the level with that claim?
He seems to believe it.
Because that does work. It
It
does,
does, but I don't think that's the focal point. I think that could be a secondary thing. But
especially with how ridiculous Kevin Nash's gimmicks were.
yeah, I think Kevin certainly had more to be disgruntled about than than Hall. Uh, Scott Hall never had to wear a rubber mask, but I mean, I think that's a good secondary story. But I know Bischoff, it does not budge about that as their main motivation. That's what I was trying to portray, and
Yeah.
I don't know if that's bullshit or he seems to actually believe it. That's not what I got from watching it
So
as a fan.
yeah. Oh, and I also had a thought about that as well, with how edgy, especially Nash, like as Diesel was too, is edgy with all of like the the worked shoots. I don't know if that was really a thing at this time, but um, if that was really the driving force, why wouldn't have someone made jokes about the great and powerful Oz,
That's the
Vinny
thing.
Vegas? Like if he's
The
taking
Diamond
Nash,
Stud.
yeah, why wouldn't there be shots at them for how ridiculous they are if they're going to roll in here and start kicking everyone's chairs around, saying how stupid their gimmicks are? No one ever did that to them.
Yeah, so you would think if that was the driving force, it would get brought up.
Yeah,
And that's the thing. Scott and Kevin, to my recollection, never said anything about that in promos or anything about like, I'm not Vinny Vegas anymore. This is, times have changed,
yeah,
like, the way Bischoff was portraying it, it's almost like, oh, I was a nerd in high school, then I went and made it, and now I'm coming back to my high school reunion to show off how great I am to all you losers that never left and made anything yourselves. Like, if that were the case, would they have brought that up in promos? And maybe
let
they
it,
did, and I don't recall that. It's
I don't
certainly
believe they did.
possible, but
Yeah,
I don't remember that happening.
no, and I think you're right. That would have been brought up. They would want to rub it in everyone's face that they invented post-its. So
Right.
that never happened.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Been waiting for like 45 seconds to time that just. um. So
It's much
one,
appreciated.
yeah.
It's
Um.
sad the amount of Romy and Michelle references that we have on the show.
I know, and in real life too.
It was a great movie. Like, oh, that was such a good movie.
Yeah. I mean, one of the greatest ones of our lifetime. Um.
Yeah.
So I did. So yeah. So Scott interrupts. Steve Dahl and the Mauler, Mike Enos with Colonel Robert Parker. And I've been just looking up a little thing. Enos was also Blake Beverly.
Oh, of course. Of course he was.
So, because I know he was Mean Mike Enos, but I couldn't remember what else he was, and he was Blake Beverly. Yeah, poor guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he interrupts, he issues the challenge, and then just that famous line: "You want to go to war? You want a war? You're gonna get one."
And then there was the whole thing about like, oh, he was being Razor Ramon, um, which he was, but there's also the argument that the Diamond Stud had the curly Q hair, he had the toothpick, like so. A lot of that stuff, and I know that would come out in the lawsuit and everything, but like a lot of those mannerisms and characteristics were pre Razor Ramon. So, but he was talking 100% like Razor Ramon for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, and like his voice is, very naturally deep and very distinctive to him. And so even later on, when like the accent would mostly be gone, like I would still be able to hear him and instantly know who he was, even if
Yeah,
he wasn't laying on the Cuban accent um, really thick.
yeah,
And in fact, like there's sometimes where, like on shoot interviews and stuff, where he is just being Scott Hall. Like again, his voice just it's a deep voice. It flows, and so I don't necessarily agree with them that was he was just just trying to paint himself as Razor Ramon during all of this without any thought to the diamond stud or anything. So
Yeah.
I agree quite a bit with you, is what
Yeah.
I'm trying to say.
But just this perfect classic promo. It's one of those things where I hadn't seen it in forever, but I could remember it word for word by memory anyway, just because it was so iconic, delivered perfectly. Um, you know, the first shot has been fired,
Yep, it sure has.
And from there, we
Um,
get Sergeant Craig Pittman,
with Teddy Long,
who was chubby here.
he sure
I
was.
forgot that I'm used to seeing Teddy super skinny, but
Holla holla.
yeah, that
Um,
dude had the longest arms.
he, and I think those like
He could tie
long,
his shoes without bending over. He had some long ass arms.
yeah, and I think those just cut really long suits that he wore, and plus, like when he moved, he was like a top spinning all the way down the aisle.
Yeah. And he's
Um,
going to set up a tag team match here on SmackDown
holla, holla, holla,
against The
holla.
Undertaker. There's always a tag team match to punish someone against The Undertaker on SmackDown. Undertaker
Um,
wrestled like 9 times every SmackDown in tag team matches to punish heels.
yep. And that's the thing. I can name like 5 different people who were general manager of Raw. I can't name one other person who was SmackDown general manager aside from Teddy.
Was Vicky on SmackDown?
Yes. Yep. Vicky was, and
Vicky
she,
was really good.
yeah,
She was really good. What a surprise she was. Who knew she had that in her?
yeah, and she's on screen talent with AEW too. I don't believe it's
Oh, is she?
as prominent, but yeah,
Who would have guessed? Like, let's take one of the most beloved wrestlers of all time. Let's take his grieving widow. How much more likable can you be? Let's make you like one of the best heels of your era.
yep,
And she
and
pulled it off.
yeah, and I think this is like the way you can look at that and know that she pulled it off because of how good she was. You can put a microphone in front of her, and if she just steps out of "excuse me" into Eddie's wife, the crowd will drop on a dime, uh, just cheer, clap, and just acknowledge her if she needed to on like the rare promos or whatever. Um,
Yeah.
the crowd would absolutely acknowledge that part of her, and then she could step right back in to her "excuse me, Vicky." Um, and for what they needed her to do, she hit it out of the park. She really did.
Yeah. That was just one of those like very pleasant surprises with how good she was.
Yeah.
But
Um,
yeah, so we got Teddy Long here managing Sergeant Craig Pittman, wrestling DDP. And we've talked a lot, like particularly in our ECW shows, but as well, some of the other shows where we get to see people on their way to becoming what they would become. It's very interesting to see DDP on his way to becoming
yep.
the DDP we would know and love.
Yeah. And
He's not there yet here.
no, and especially with like DDP yoga,
Yeah.
like arguably one of the most successful post wrestling wrestlers like
Oh
in
yeah.
history. Um, but so there's a couple things that I took note of in this match. We had already switched to Bischoff, I believe, and Heenan.
I don't have that yet. I have that later on. So, oh
Okay,
no, we're still because I made a note about Zabisco's commentary during this match. So we're still with Zabisco and
that's right.
Shivani.
Yeah, when Pittman wrestles the following week, they've already switched. And the
Okay.
the only reason that that's important is that Bischoff talks about the power plant,
Yeah.
WCW's wrestling training facility, and to have it on screen like this was, I mean, I don't think it's like controversial, but it was very unheard of at this point to say, hey, this is how you can become a wrestler.
I remember they used to run ads for it.
Yeah. Yep. And Pittman is a former Marine. I don't know if he just did his time and got out or if he retired. But let me see here. Yeah, he joined the Marine Corps, was the rank of sergeant. He
so he was a
wrestled.
legit sergeant. Okay.
Yeah, and he wrestled for the Marines.
Wow.
Like the different, like I know the Army has their own boxing team. I don't know about wrestling. The Air Force.
Didn't Lashley do that?
Yes. Yep. He was like, that was, from what I understand how it works, that was his MOS. Like he stepped out of whatever actual job he had, or he was brought on in that, and that's all he did. Like, I met some people who were in the Air Force band when I was in like basic training. And so because you travel and that's your thing, they automatically, like, you start off at E1, E2, all the way up to E9. When the people in the Air Force band finished basic training, they went right to E6, which is right before a senior NCO, strictly for pay purposes.
Well,
They're not going to be in charge of shops or anything like that, to where having the experience would actually matter. Like the same thing with like doctors and lawyers. They come in as a captain in the Air Force right away, strictly for pay purposes. And
okay.
so the fact that Pittman did wrestle for them, um, and he won several championships with the Marine Corps wrestling team, but he was also a 1991 USA Greco-Roman heavyweight champion.
So everything about this dude's legit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. So he was a Greco-Roman wrestler, medaled in
Oh,
that as well, um, and a legitimate Marine. So, because I heard one of the announcers say that he did have an amateur background, and so I just looked it up, and everything about this guy is legit. This isn't really a gimmick.
yeah, he was a real sergeant,
Yeah,
legit badass. Huh.
yeah, yeah, yep.
Good
Very
on
legit.
him.
Yeah, and he would be independent. He would go into mixed martial arts as well. He only wrestled 4 times. Twice in '95, he won his debut match, lost his second match, and then in 2011, um, he would lose his first match, and then in 2012, his last one, he would win. So his
That's a
MMA
big
record,
gap.
yeah.
95 to 2011, that's a big gap.
Well, and that's the thing. How old would he have been in 2011 to
Right.
2012? I mean, he was in like his prime in like the early to mid 90s. So like,
Right.
good for him.
I
But
did not know any of these things about him. It's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah, and that stuff was definitely more interesting than the match to me.
I did get a kick out of some of the stuff they did here, like Paige is mocking Pittman.
Yeah, he stands up and does like the sloppy salute.
Yeah.
That
And
was
then
that was well
Pittman
done.
starts doing one-arm push-ups. Paige goes to kick him, and Pittman rolls out of the way, and Paige falls on his ass. And it reminded me of Charlie Brown trying to kick the football.
And there's Lucy holding that.
It's exactly that. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. But yeah, so them talking about the power plant, me, huge fan of DDP even back then, throughout his whole career and kind of his life too. But them plugging the power plant, they would run ads like you had said, and Pittman was a sergeant. He was in the Marines. He is a very accomplished wrestler, and he had done his MMA fights prior to this.
Oh, yeah,
So
that's right. Yeah, because 95, you said. Oh.
yeah, But yeah, no, yeah, the match wasn't that long, but I always enjoy seeing DDP.
And it's cool to see him like he's a heel here, but he's trying to get the Diamond Cutter over, and he's on his way to becoming what he would become. But here, I know the criticism of him was like he had every gimmick.
Yeah,
Like I've heard like Bischoff and others. I think Nash has made fun of him for it, and I think Page has owned it too, where it's sort of like, he had the toothpick, the sunglasses, he had a feather boa, he had a cane, he had hats on, he had, like pick a gimmick, don't pick every gimmick. But he was trying to figure out kind of who he was, and he didn't get there yet, but he's on his way, and
yeah,
he gets the win here with the Diamond Cutter.
yeah. It kind of sneaks that out.
Yeah.
I think Pittman was either getting in the ring or coming off the ropes, and kind of locked right in. So out of nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, Page was doing that long before Orton was, and it ended up getting over big for sure.
Yep.
But
Yep. And
he's on his way to that now. It's kind of cool seeing him
yeah,
on the way up.
absolutely.
Then we
So
have oh, go ahead.
well, I was going to say, I believe it's after this is when they change commentary teams.
Yeah, they have a couple like interview segments and things like that, and then they go to hour two. So this is the last match before they switch over. And then they've got some video packages and stuff, and there's one about Randy Savage video package, just basically highlighting how wild and unpredictable he is. Talking about how he lost Liz to Flair, and now Liz and Flair are spending all his money, hence all the champagne and all that stuff, because prior to that, Ric Flair was living very modestly. But now he's got that Savage money to spend. So.
And what's neat is that those two are kind of picking up where they left off in the WWF years before.
It is kind of cool that they kind of go back to that whole thing, and Liz is in the middle again.
Yeah.
Then they've got Mean Gene. He interviews Shark. Earthquake with teeth drawn on his jaw and chin.
That was really well done too.
It reminded me of like at a fair where like they've got the little face painting booth for children where they can draw like cat whiskers on the like.
He's very astute.
He says he's been kicked out of the Dungeon of Doom. That's a shame for him. And then he says he's going to beat the Giant and he's going to take care of Jimmy Hart. So poor Earthquake. I'm just thinking about all those like early WWF shows we covered and how he was always such a treat. Like one of those surprises where we watched those old shows and we're like, damn, Earthquake was good. We kind of forgot how really good he was. And now I see him and he's got like the little teeth drawn on his chin, and it's just sad.
Well, so because we have been exposed and have a newfound like appreciation and even liked for his stuff in the WWF, I have looked up some things. Like he was a legitimate sumo wrestler before he went into pro wrestling. He did win something. Like I know when he was in Japan, is that like one of the bigger matches that he had to cover up the tattoo. So he had a tiger tattooed. He went to LSU, and the LSU mascot is the tiger. So that's where that tattoo came from.
Okay.
And because of how tattoos were treated in Japan at the time, he had to cover it up.
Yakuza.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. And he said that had he had gone on to like stay there, he would have had to have had it removed in order to continue competing in Japan. And so that did have at least some influence as to why he left sumo wrestling.
You did your homework on this, huh?
Well, and he is a very interesting guy too.
Well, I just remember like a lot of those shows we covered, he was always a highlight of of those shows for like a certain era, and it was like every time we covered those shows, it was like, damn, Earthquake was really good. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, him and Typhoon did breathe a lot of air into the tag team division, which
yeah,
was starting to kind of do like they still had like LOD and Axe Smash and Crush, and so it was dwindling down. But he was a monster heel for Hulk Hogan. Hulk,
yeah,
like when Hulk Hogan was slaying dragons and they needed a dragon, he was one of those guys. Like that's significant. Like if you made money with Hogan back in this time, you had to be at like the top of your game, and he was one of those
yeah.
guys that could do that.
Or the thing where he crushed the Snake. He crushed
Yeah,
Damien. He killed him.
yeah, and like they had, I think you were the one that had told me they had like nylons filled with like sausage or hamburg or something,
Yeah, I
but
think it was something like that.
they had like a little motor in there that was making the bag move. So you really believed. I remember watching it as a kid and crying my eyes out. I absolutely remember that so vividly, that like seeing that for the first time and just crying and crying. But they had the thing in there so you could, Damien's really in there.
Yeah.
He's really crushing it. Um,
And
and then
now he's got teeth drawn on his face.
he does. He does. Yeah, he was in the Dungeon of Doom as Avalanche and then the Shark, and all on his own, from what I understand, he had the LSU Tiger covered up with a shark.
That poor man.
I know. Like, yeah, I don't know. That's like especially if like he played football and wrestled for LSU in college, and so being an LSU Tiger was like even nowadays that's a big deal, but for back then, I've not been able to find anything that said why he covered up the tiger. He must have really got excited about the shark.
I guess so. I don't know. But
Anyway,
so
blather.
then yeah, from there we go to a video package of Hogan, and it shows him hanging out with famous people. They show him hanging out with George Foreman, Shaq, Kevin Green, Dennis Rodman, and Sugar Ray Leonard. Him and Rodman would go on to do some stuff together, but just basically letting us know how important Hulk Hogan is. Um, and yeah, that's when we get hour two. Bischoff and Heenan are the commentary team, and Heenan picks up right where Zabisco left off, shitting on Kevin Green and Mongo McMichael and NFL players. Eric comes out and he kind of dismisses the stuff Scott Hall said, kind of downplaying it, which is what he should do in the
Yep.
role that he was playing. So good on him.
Well, and that's also kind of pulling the curtain back a little bit too, because they
Yeah,
weren't advertising what Eric Bischoff really was to WCW at the time.
right.
It's like
So
why are you issuing a challenge to this commentator?
yeah, yeah. So it did, like you said, pull back the curtain a bit, which is smart, and they would be very successful at doing that. So then we have a WCW World Title match: the Shark versus the Giant, accompanied by Jimmy Hart. I My first note here is that this Nitro seems like a step down from the others we have covered. The matches are just okay. The crowd is not as hot. Like we've talked about the previous Nitros, how perfectly they were structured and everything that was on there seemed to be on there for a reason.
Yeah,
And I didn't get that vibe with this at all. As far as looking at the show overall, not the Scott Hall segment, but the overall show.
yeah.
So Giant wins this with a choke slam after Jimmy Hart gets involved. Then Boss Man shows up and cuts the Shark's hair. Uh,
So before that, the Giant scoops up the Shark. I
yes.
mean, holds him with perfect control and slams him, which even for someone like the Giant or Big Show, Like Earthquake was, I think, like 6'6", 6'7". I don't know if he really was right at 500 pounds then, but
Huge guy though.
yeah. And then he does a Earthquake does a drop kick to Big Show.
That's the thing. These are both very athletic super heavyweights.
Yes.
And it's funny to hear stories from people like in podcasts or whatever who talk about Paul White in this era as an athlete. And some of the stories people tell are just amazing. Like anyone who was in the ring with him in this era, just at his size, and he was very lean here for him, very
Yeah.
young, no injuries. So it's like just the stuff, the power and the speed and athleticism. Like when I hear people talk about stories of him from this era, it's just everyone puts over what an athlete he was.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, we were very fortunate to be able to, catch him when we were. And again, going back to review all of this, just
and
nice.
it'll be cool covering his progression as well as he continues on through WCW and then becomes the Big Show. And but yeah, so he gets the win here with the choke slam, and then Boss Man comes out and
Big
starts.
Bubba.
Sorry,
Sorry.
yep, Big Bubba. I try to call them by their names at the time,
Yeah.
and cuts off Shark's hair. It's hard to call him Shark. Cuts off Shark's hair. And it's like, has this man not suffered enough?
Yeah.
He's got teeth drawn on his face. He covered up his tattoo that is obviously meaningful to him for a stupid gimmick. He's getting his head cut off. Like, has this man not suffered enough? Boss Man looks badass, though.
He does. Like, he was the prison guard in WWF, so like his hair and like his facial hair was always trimmed and very
Yeah.
presentable. Here he looks like a big old redneck,
Yeah.
and from what I understand was in a lot of ways, but yeah, he
Yeah, just
kind
looked
of
kind of like a badass kind of biker guy that you'd see at the bar picking fights and
yes.
playing pool and taking
Yeah.
your woman and
Yeah. The kind of guy you
mouthing
don't.
off.
Yeah. Yeah, the kind of guy you don't want following you to your car at night. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, Big Bubba, Boss Man, whatever. Uh, Boss Man was one of my all-time favorite wrestlers as a kid, and he made Big Bubba work really, really well.
And it would not be the last time that Paul White and Boss
Yeah,
Man would cross paths. I know one of your favorite memories
that's
of all
right.
time
That's right.
would happen a couple of years later.
I know. I hadn't connected that dot. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, they'd cross paths again.
Yeah.
So moving on, we have Max with two X's versus Lex with one X for the TV title. It's weird to see Lex with the TV title.
Yeah.
Max is a big boy.
Yes.
That
I
is
don't
not a small man.
know. And I don't recall seeing him before this either.
Yeah, I don't know much about the guy, but uh,
Yeah.
very impressive just visually for sure.
Yeah. He was Max Muscle, Max Pain, um, I believe. Yeah, he was in the Dungeon of Doom, but yeah, he was huge. He was absolutely huge.
Yeah. So the crowd's digging Lex here. The match itself, pretty standard kind of power wrestling from both guys. It was nothing extraordinary, but nothing bad either, certainly. Lex gets the victory with the torture rack. They did a good job of kind of selling that. Um, Mean Gene gets in the ring to interview Lex. They show footage of the Giant hitting a nice choke slam on Lex through the table. And then Lex, and I thought this was smart to portray it this way. Lex says he wants to wrestle every big man in WCW to practice getting them up in the rack so that when he finally gets in there with the Giant, he can he can do it. I
Yeah,
thought that was a smart little strategy to kind of build Lex for the Giant. I
yeah,
thought that was well played.
completely agree.
Um, we get hard work Bobby Walker up next versus Brad Armstrong. Uh, Walker tries to do a lot of impressive things, and it does not really play out that way.
Yeah. Um, Bischoff does allude to hard work Bobby Walker also being from the power plant.
That's not a ringing endorsement
Not right now.
because he is very ambitious. He tries to do a lot of stuff, and you can tell he's a good athlete, but just everything he tries to do doesn't play out the way it was supposed to.
Well, and that's the thing. The things he's trying to do are these very nimble, athletic jumps and balancing act, like on the top rope and everything. And so I had to, like, after the, like, there were two or three where he slipped off the rope, like,
Yeah.
completely. After like the second or third time, I'm like, maybe build up to that.
If you're that green, just keep it simple. Stick to what you can do. Work on the impressive stuff in your spare time. Like, don't try doing it on live TV.
Yeah.
And then yeah, Walker went. I give him an A for effort. He tried to do a lot of ambitious things. It just didn't work out for him.
Yeah.
And then so Walker ends up getting the win with a botched kind of flying shoulder block off the top. Didn't look good. And my last note, which isn't necessarily about this match, just the show, it says, I wrote, it seems like they're having a hard time filling 2 hours.
I think you are, again, completely correct in that.
We get a quick WCW magazine promo here where the little boy at the breakfast table turns into Sting.
I
They
remember seeing this as a kid.
Yeah, and they talk about in this issue, there's articles about the Giant, about Woman, and about WCW Uncensored. So I know we talked on the last Nitro how I thought that was smart to advertise specifically what you can get in the current issue to
Yeah.
entice readers to do that. So I thought that was cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I absolutely remember seeing that commercial
Yeah,
when we were watching wrestling around this time. So that was kind of cool.
yeah. Up next, spoiler alert, this is my match of the night.
Right there with you.
We've got Lord Steven Regal, accompanied by Jeeves, versus Alex Wright. My first note is this should be awesome.
Yeah.
How much did they drop the ball on Alex Wright? You talk about fucking potential, man. This tall, good looking, athletic kid, second generation. I've heard Regal tell stories about his father, who I guess was a really big deal in Germany or Austria, I forget, but I know his dad was a big deal. Um, Alex Wright, like just potential in all caps.
Yeah. No matter who he was with, like I know him and Disco had a very fun little pairing at
Yeah.
times. And then what did they change this? Was it Berlin? When they,
Yes.
yeah. Um, Everything they had him do, he did great.
Yeah, I just feel like
They could have gotten so much more mileage out of him.
that's one of those guys where it's sort of like almost like looking at a young Chris Jericho, where it's like that dude could be world champ one day. Like that's how I feel about like looking at Alex Wright in this era, where it's like the Wonder Kid. Like that dude could be a main eventer one day.
Yeah, because he wasn't just like, oh, he had a great look. I mean, great. He was taller, very trim. Um,
He had that great head of hair, super good looking dude, very
yeah,
athletic, super
yeah,
smooth too. Like I was watching the stuff he was doing here, really smooth for like a really young kid.
yeah, yep, absolutely. And even when he was on the mic, um, maybe like if he was playing up like his German accent, which I swear he did at times, like
Yeah.
listening to like shoot interviews with him.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just like a home run every time. He was, yeah. I got very excited for this too.
Yeah. Really great like chain wrestling here. You got two European guys going at it, so you know it's going to be the technical wrestling is going to be flawless, which it was.
Hmm.
Um, they take a commercial break and throw in a Glacier promo during this match. Um, I loved Regal uh, had Alex right in a headlock, and he's like open hand slapping his ears
Yeah.
while he's got him in the headlock, and I'm like, that is so William Regal.
Yep.
That's such a Regal thing to do. Tons of like great nuance and heel psychology. Uh, and like the story of this match is just simple and effective. Where it's like Regal is the rugged, cagey veteran who's in control of the majority of this match, but he's occasionally kind of like young like wonderkind that busts out something impressive. Just a good story, and Regal ends up getting the like roll through with the bridge. Just a really nice little match. This is one of those things I'd love to see these two like on a pay-per-view where they had more time,
Hmm.
because I just like, Regal was always one of the things I loved about watching WCW in this era, and Alex Wright, um, just kind of seeing him and just the potential.
Yep. Yeah. I
Um,
got excited for this. Um, it 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 also seemed like all of like everything we saw hard work try to do. Like we saw Alex Wright kind of nail it. Um,
yeah,
and yeah, he was just incredible. I love going back and seeing uh, Lord Steven Regal like
yes,
in his prime here because he was still like the promo. I believe it was on like the following Nitro where he cuts a promo after his match. Um,
he cuts a promo here. Okerlund interviews him right after this match.
maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
I forget. He does something on the next show too. But here, yeah, after the match, Okerlund gets in the ring, interviews Regal. I did notice Regal was bleeding from the nose.
Yep.
Um, he calls Okerlund a little toad, insults the fans, and then he just kind of shits all over everybody. He calls the Giant a Barnum and Bailey oddity or a Barnum and
Yeah,
Bailey freak.
which is
Uh,
funny because Regal was a legitimate carnival wrestler.
yeah. He addresses the Macho Man, talking about like I forget how he phrased it, but he thinks he's tough. Uh, he addresses Scott Hall asking for a war, and he says, "I'm not going anywhere."
Yeah.
He challenges Sting, who he refers to as a painted clown, so he's going after everyone pretty hard here.
Yeah. And it was
And he
either um
challenges,
well, it was either here or the other one. Sorry, I don't have more detailed notes, but he said something like um that he kind of demands to be taken more seriously.
and yeah, that's why he challenged Sting, because he said that will earn him the respect if he can take out Sting, and it'll hopefully earn him a title shot. Um, so that's why he challenged yeah, painted clown Sting, uh, to earn respect from everybody. He gets in a lot in a really short promo here, and he goes after a lot of people. Um, so yeah, really good match, really good promo. I loved everything about this.
Yep.
From there, a match that as soon as I heard this, I was like, I want to watch this. Sting versus Scott Steiner.
Yeah.
I was excited to see this. However, I've got to talk about Scott Steiner's hair here. He's got a mullet, an undercut, a ponytail, and bangs all at once.
Yeah, I mean, if it wasn't for the fact that, you know, looks like he could eat a Buick. I mean, he wouldn't be able to pull that off.
Yeah, like if he wasn't one of the toughest human beings, like,
That's the
you would
thing.
say something to him about that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And like that, even though, like I know his like styling with like just his hair and everything changed quite a bit. But if it wasn't for like his muscles on muscles on muscles, him and Big Papa Pump are very hard to kind of see, like the evolution of
Yes.
like his look. I mean, his physique is unlike any other.
Mm.
But I mean, even just like the way he talks and everything, it's like I struggle seeing Big Papa Pump, White Thunder, in
Yeah.
like the Steiner brothers, Scott Steiner, um, and so it's fascinating to kind of see how that came about. And again, even at this time, how jacked was this guy?
I know. Oh my God.
I mean, and like when we get into it, like you're gonna have Lex, Sting, and both Steiners. I mean, you've got some. These guys are just absolute units, and Scott is
Yeah, it's
how?
weird that Sting's the small, the least impressive physique in the ring. Like,
Yeah.
and Sting was in phenomenal shape, and he was the least impressive physique out of the four.
Yeah, this must have been back when he was tanning.
Yeah. So I made a note, and I kind of alluded to it last night when you were watching this, but I was like, maybe it's my mood, but this show lacks the magic of the previous Nitros we've covered. And I wrote that even the stuff that looks really good on paper is just kind of blah. Um, I wrote,
The,
I feel like I should like this match more than I actually do.
well, eh, the only thing that I wondered was how much of this was put together around Scott Hall showing up. And the more I watched this and then the following episode and even kind of thought about it, I really don't think his impact on this show was maybe properly planned for. Like, and it's so easy to look back with hindsight 25 years later. It really is.
Right.
Um, but in my mind, it's like the whole show had to have been based around him showing up, and that really
Yeah.
wasn't the case. So that's not like a critique or anything. It was just how I remembered things compared to how it actually was.
Yeah. But this, like, when I saw Sting versus Scott Steiner, I'm like, oh, this is going to be phenomenal. And then, like, I mean, the action was good. Both guys were, obviously very athletic, kind of went back and forth. Both guys worked hard. I'm not sure what was missing for me, but this was just sort of like not as good as it should have been. Even for a TV match, Sting and Scott Steiner should be phenomenal. And this was just, I think, kind of all of this for me was like, eh. Like at the end of every match, I'm like, it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great. Like,
Well, and Sting and Steiner seemed a lot more like a brawl than a wrestling match. Like just a couple times, Steiner gets a hold of Sting and flips him around like Sting is not really 6'3" and 280 pounds. But a lot of it seemed very meathead kind of action.
yeah, I mean, I don't know how often these two cross paths in like singles, but I would think I mean, both are very capable performers, great athletes. I think their styles are very compatible, but this just kind of didn't do much for me. And then like Lex comes out, Rick Steiner comes out. Scott does almost like a angle slam off the top. It was kind of similar to an angle slam that he hit
I'm, s-
Sting with off the top.
oh, yeah. It wasn't. I thought he did a kind of like a belly to belly off the top.
It was
I'll,
something that, I mean, angle slams didn't exist yet, but it
yeah.
to me it looked in the vicinity of an angle slam what he did. I don't know there was a name for it at this time, but
I do recall the top rope maneuver from Scott to Sting.
it looked good. Whatever it was, it looked good. Sting hits a tombstone. I kind of popped for that a little bit. And then Rick and Lex get involved. They kind of have a big schmoz in the ring with all four guys, and then a bunch of the boys come out to separate them. So it was just like, it was a TV match. And it was okay, but...
I think it is kind of neat that Sting had Bret Hart and The Undertaker's finisher going on around this time.
Yeah. So that was the final match of this first Nitro, and then they cut to the announce team at their table. And I always did like the setup they had with the announce table on Nitro. I thought it was different from Raw, where they're at ringside.
Yeah.
I thought this separated them. It gave it a different kind of feel. So I always thought that was cool. And Scott Hall comes out, tells the Ken doll to have Ted get his three best guys to settle it in the ring where it matters, not in the newspapers or the dirt sheet. So that's a little inside baseball.
Yep.
Again, like you said, pulling back the curtain. And the Ken doll asks who we is, because Scott Hall says we a couple times. Who's we? Bischoff was very good here. And he says that they're taking over, which is, I believe, the first time we hear that phrase. Would not be the last. And Eric and Bobby sell this whole thing perfectly. So,
yep. Even so, if I can be nitpicky, the only thing on this show was like right after Hall issues the challenge and leaves. The couple times Eric said, "I'm not going to dignify this by saying his name."
Yeah.
The only thing I could think of was that, and from what I understand, they've admitted this, they weren't sure what his name was going to be yet.
Yeah.
And so, and that's not being nitpicky. Like I'm not like taking shots at that, but just kind of like those little things that we can kind of pull out now and like look back on. It's like, I'm not going to say his name
because we don't know what we're calling him.
I know, but they're still putting him on TV though. So that's like,
but you know who he is.
Yep.
You just don't know why he's here.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, this was lightning in a bottle.
Yep. And kudos to Scott for how he delivered it.
Yeah.
Because I think if he tried to be, and that I think goes back to what I was saying, like, could anyone have done this if they were a big star from New York? And I don't think they could. It's really how Scott portrayed this. I think if he had portrayed this like a pro wrestler cutting a wrestling promo, this doesn't work.
Yeah.
But he cut it like a shoot and did a lot of kind of inside references that maybe a lot of people didn't get, but he played it like it was real.
Well, and the ones that did get it were probably just ecstatic, especially for the small group of people that were aware of the curtain call.
Yeah.
Before this, I mean, like that. I mean, like they're like had to have just been going crazy. Like, they can kind of see like the inline, and this definitely blurred the lines, but all of the pieces were there to, like you said, the inside baseball stuff was spot on and probably in more prominent display than the business had ever been.
Yeah, I mean, this was definitely cutting edge, and I really I forgot about the line where he talked about, like, we're going to settle it in the ring where it matters, not in newspapers and dirt sheets, where it's sort of like, for those who got it, it's like, oh shit.
Well,
he went
Vince,
there.
And Vince was taking out full page ads.
Yep.
And yeah, so that's.
Yeah, for those who got it, it was like, oh shit.
Yeah. But even 25 years later, going back, it's like, man,
excuse me.
This was great.
So for the first show, My match of the night was Regal and Alex Wright, and my moment of the night was anytime Scott Hall was on screen,
Yep.
particularly that first promo.
Yep. I'm right there with you.
So this, I've got to correct you. The second show was June 10th. There was a week in between the first show
Oh,
and there was a week in between Scott Hall debuting and Kevin Nash debuting.
I did not know that.
Yeah, because they do on this second show, they do cut back to the previous week, which is in between the last show we covered and this one. So there was a week in between, but we skipped that one just so we could do Hall's debut and Nash's debut.
Gotcha.
So this was actually June 10th. This second show.
All right. Any closing thoughts on Nitro #1 here?
It just kind of reiterating what I said before. This did not have the magic of the previous Nitros overall, but historically, obviously a very important show, and Scott Hall's portrayal of it, as well as the way like Bischoff sold it, were fantastic. And Shivani and all of the announcers, the way they sold it was flawless, and they certainly had somewhere to go with this that would change the game.
Yep, they sure did. I mean, this really is like the shot heard around the world.
Yeah.
So, yeah. All right. So we will close off with that.